of them. I would have had a fuck ton of GameStop. But I sold them. I didn't know, right? Like I fucking squeeze was on. I was like, I'm gonna sell some contracts and make some money, right? And I figured, like everyone else did, when they shut off the buy button and the stock started to dip, that was going to be the end of it, right? If only I'd known then what I know now. But we know it now. Or I do. I don't know. How would others learn? I mean, it's just like every other point of interest, right? Like, it's talk about it. If you think it's a valid theory, say something. You know, that's how ideas circulate. I think it's a viable strategy, but I'm not recommending anybody collude to do it. I just think it's a very lucrative window in which to buy options contracts. How's that different than telling everybody to DRS their shares? Now they're just generating my So they should have exercised and the drop wouldn't have been so significant. Shiban, what drop? If they'd exercised, then those market makers that were internalizing orders and not hedging their delta properly would have been fucked. Because then they'd have to go out to market and find those shares that they didn't hedge immediately. I think it would just snowball too hard. I feel like the Dans would just clip you reading Ko-Fis of them promoting themselves. It's probably true. How much did those 20s and 35s cost in premiums? They were cheap. My initial buy into GameStop was only $10,000. I bought more. I bought weeklies when it started to rip, but hey, Pipe, I've been watching since Warden went broke. I've learned so much. Thanks for the honesty, education, humor, and financial advice. Just submitted my WeBull application. Let's fucking go. Awesome, Optimus Prime. I'm glad to hear that, man. Friday Night Confessions of a Gherk. How much of price action? Well, usually the only people that exercise options are institutions. Institutions in long positions, right? Like they bought into something, they bought leaps, and then they exercise those leaps the next year, right? Because they want to stay in that asset. Usually retail investors don't exercise options. I mean, some do, but it's rare. But that's what you do if you want to stay in, right? After your option's going to expire. Is you I think only like 8% of options, or 8 to 12% of options get exercised. It's very, very few. What's a pivotal date in January for 2022? I think the 25th. The 25th is the date ETF leaps and GME leaps both have gamma exposure. And last year, everyone sold their options. So like if we go back to last year, right? The gamma exposure started from the leaps in on the 26th. Right here. So this was the date that the gamma exposure began on those leaps, and the GME leaps and the ETF leaps. GME, ETF, right? And you see how much the price drove up? And it continued to drive up here. But then everyone sold because this was Friday. So that was the pivotal date last January also. That was the date that we went from like 100 and I think it was like $120 all the way the fuck up to like 380. And that date falls on the 25th this year. God, I've really got to redo this chart. I've moved so many lines around. That date's right here this year. But if everyone's options this year, again, are for, the 28th and the 21st, then that pressure is going to get relieved. But if everyone's options are in February, GG. Then no one takes their foot off the gas, right? Like I don't think this theory is good because I made it up or to sell you guys something. I think this is actually what causes MOASS and what causes the most pressure on the short hedge funds. Like I think this is it. This is I wouldn't say that lightly. I realize how badly I can get burned on the other side of it. The risk of me even talking about options is significant. And if I didn't think it was true, I wouldn't say it. Now, this may not be the way, but it looks like the best one. RC bought a valuable company cheap. I don't know how encouraged he is to cause a short squeeze on his stock. He's got a company to run. I don't think he's gonna hop on a fucking horse and be our knight in shining armor, though. Clip it? I don't know when it began.